In 1982, Lucio Fulci upped the controversial ante with his ultimate video nasty. Still often released with the most brutal moments removed, The New York Ripper pushed the boundaries of the horror genre, taking the depiction of violence against women to a near unprecedented level at the time. I am the Italian Horror Guy, and this is the Italian Horror Guy podcast. So, full disclosure, this is one of my favorite horror films, Italian horror films perhaps, and it's certainly not because it's it's not high production value. It's not necessarily a particularly well. I don't think it's hideously well written, but I think it was a crucial point. It was the early stages of maybe not early stages actually, the mid stages, let's say, of the slasher cycle, and it ultimately, I think, took it to a particular level, in terms of approach and mindset. So I think it's easy to throw a bunch of over the top stuff into a film to make the point, or well, not even to make. Well, I guess that's the point. Not to make the point or any particular point per se, but to simply have it in there. So it's controversial. So it gets people talking. And as I mentioned in the opener there, this is a video nasty, and within the context of how many films were put in that category at the time, there was really no realistic possibility that this one wouldn't be. I don't want to have some pretentious explanation or defense even of gratuitous violence, gratuitous anything, because yes, I guess in my time I've come around to the concept that certain things are gratuitous, but what I haven't gone past is that the accusation of gratuity or gratuitousness, whichever is the word, generally come at whatever arbitrary point a particular person draws it at. That this is the point at which I can't handle it, therefore it's too far, therefore it's gratuitous. I'm also not going to make some kind of claim that the excesses in this film are in support of art necessarily. I think because, funnily enough, I think that I believe it's a Fulci quote that violence is Italian art. Might be an Argento one. But regardless, I think he has made a bit of an art form out of violence in the past. There's something a little bit more artistic about even the Gates of Hell trilogy, which I will be beginning in, I believe, 2 podcasts' time. Just a bit of a preview for you, where there's something very vibrant and colourful and gothic about those films, even if they do, reach the absurd. And I think that's part of the point, that they're quite supernatural at times. And I think I've probably been guilty of of over reminiscing about the Machara torture scene from Don't Torture a Duckling on previous episodes, but there's something artful about the brutality of that film, because I think, or that scene, because I think there needs to be, within the context of everything that's going on. The thing is, this isn't about pretenses of art. I don't think this film. There's something gritty and hateful and aggressive about it, and I think that's sort of the point. There's a certain element of, you want violence, you want misogyny, you accuse me of violence, you accuse me of misogyny. I'll show you violence and misogyny. And again, to be clear, for anyone unclear, I'm not suggesting that the depiction of misogyny on screen should be conflated with the idea that the creator of the image is a misogynist necessarily, because the example that I always use for that is there are hundreds of World War II movies, and I don't think every person who's ever directed or created a World War II movie approved of World War II. That said, there is the need to unpack a lot of what happens in this film, because where I think it's particularly groundbreaking in a sense is in its ability to make us uncomfortable. Obviously, slasher films and horror films, that's one of their main purposes. But, the more I watch this film, the more I think about it, the more I realize it isn't exactly scary. And I don't mean in that generic, we have to keep up in the ante because then it's scary and blah, blah, blah. I mean in terms of suspense. There's a few moments of suspense. But even if in some of the moments when there is violence we weren't necessarily expecting it, it's the discomfort levels that stick with you in this movie, right? It's not so much the I wonder what's going to happen to this woman, or I wonder how if she's going to escape, how she's going to get killed. It's more, oh, that's how she's going to get killed. Oh, this is actually very, very brutal. So I also appreciate the nature of the filming of this film. There is a sort of uncanny sort of slightly disconcerting element of the film where you look at the interiors or some of the interiors and you're like, I don't think this is New York. Like the house that I think is it Peter, the actual killer? Spoiler alert. Peter and what's his girlfriend's name? Don't know. Would have thought that would have been Faye, of course, yes, Faye. Peter and Faye's house. They're sort of in I guess a New York inner city type big building, but the inside of it I just don't think was necessarily the decor that you might expect to see in early 1980s New York. But anyway, that is the nature of these films at the time. They liked to cash in on certain settings. I mean, they even put the word New York into the title, and I think I think they're playing on the Jack the Ripper element and New York and slashes, and it's really in that cycle to try to cash in on what's happening at the time. So I'll go through the moments as we go through the plot, but a particular note here for the way this film, and it reminds me a little bit of Torso, which I believe I've discussed before on this show, of the aggressive way this film makes pretty much all the men jerks and douchebags. It's a very hostile world, and I don't mean in this sort of modern way that it's done in this modern progressive way, because frankly I don't know if it was a progressive. Certainly wasn't considered as progressive as it is now to say that all men are bad and all women are victims, but it's so aggressive and direct in this film that it makes me feel like they weren't just doing openly violent things. They were trying to make a point. So I also like that there's an unashamed gritty sort of discomfort about everything that this film does, which is partly a result of not having a great budget, I think, and just sort of shooting on the fly. But it's also like where they film where they choose to film. So we start off with some random oldish man or older man walking his dog. He throws a stick, and this man, he's an absolute New Yorker. He looks quite a bit like, reminds me a lot of Joey from Friends. He's got his trench coat thing, and he's very, very condescending. Like he loves his dog. Like he throws a stick a couple of times, the dog goes and gets it, and he's just so proud of the dog for bringing the stick back. So I don't know if there's any kind of analysis that needs to go into that, but this is just some guy. I guess probably the point of this scene is to make the horrific discovery at the end of it as horrific as we can. So the dog, on the third, I think, occasion, maybe the second, when he brings back the stick, he hasn't actually brought back the stick, has he? He's brought back the severed and early stages rotting hand of what turns out to be a woman. And then we get to the special mention to the score of this film. It's got that sort of 70s, 80s New York cop sort of television show aesthetic, and I'm all for it. It sort of reminds me a little bit of the Cannibal Ferox, not that great theme, but the not as great theme, let's say, from that film. Maybe I'll include a little bit of it throughout the episode, or beginning and end when I put it all together. But there's no pretense that we're in for some kind of artistic, sort of ponderous, reflective type of movie. It's aggressive. There's people being killed. There's women being killed, and that's what this film is straight off the bat. And we see the hand, and then we see the words in New York Ripper, and all that. So then it's straight into the grit, the New York grit of it all. There's a woman with a very thick New York accent. She's annoying the main cop, played by Jack Hedley. Yeah, she's going on about Dallas. I was all that show about people with money coming out of their ass, and it's not clear if she says ears or ass. But again, it's easy to do, right? It's easy to just, let's have all the men be douchebags to the women, right? But they do it in different ways. So, Jack Hedley's character, I better get his name while we're here. Lieutenant Williams. Lieutenant Williams he's grizzled, right? And it's got to be said. I believe he was a TV actor, died a couple of years ago. He does play the grizzled, seen it all before, and a bit tired veteran cop very well. He just has that vibe about him. He's a bit of a jerk, bit of a New York jerk. I hope any New York listeners don't take that the wrong way. There's a certain boisterousness. There's a certain, there's just a certain undertone of, everyone's all right, but you're also, as in you think of everyone as a bit all right, but also a bit of a jerk and with a bit of aggression. So he's got that vibe to him. So admittedly, this older woman who's coming in, seems a bit nosy, but she is there to provide details about a murder victim. And she's like, she's got details because she picked up the phone and listened to some conversation. It sounded just like a duck. And she's like, not that I'd pry, God forbid. And he's like, God forbid. But, there's no need for him to be a jerk because he's like, she's giving him information, and he's quite dismissive of the duck thing. Until later, there's that moment, slightly later, there's that moment where some guy's like, sounded just like a duck. And he's awesome, just like a duck. Where have I heard that before? It's like, well, Lieutenant Williams, if you hadn't been such a jerk to that woman, maybe you would have actually listened to her. So I guess my point there is we've got different kinds of men being jerks, as in men being jerks to women in different kind of ways. And I think this is a very quite an effective incline in the aggression. So it goes from him just being a bit of a jerk to the guy in the car that tells that woman on the bike that she's got the brains of a chicken. Somehow, I suspect that that's possibly a translation from an insult that in Italian is a bit more, well, insulting. So that's a bit of road rage jerkery to the guys in that awful seedy pub playing pool and bullying that Deli Colli, whatever, Alexandra Deli Colli's character. So there's different kind of jerks. There's different kinds of, or different types of demonstrations of misogyny. But the point is, pretty much all the men that we come across of any note in this film, they're all bastards to women. And I really do think that that's the sort of underlying point of this film. So, quote from Lieutenant Williams: over 11 people are murdered I think he says over 11 people are murdered each day in Fun City, and half of them are women. And over half of them are women, or something like that. Is Fun City a term that's used for New York? I was never quite clear on that. So anyway, with that established, things start to escalate, I suppose. So the girl who's riding around on the bike, and it is worth noting, as usual, that they do pick model type women for these films, often actual models. So she's very, very good looking. She's riding a bike, and she very deliberately, clumsily, sort of doesn't exactly fall off it, but sort of does, and bumps into the car of a man. And they're about to get onto that boat that takes you across the harbour or whatever. I'm sure my New York listeners are much more inherently understanding of that culture. And she's really sorry. Like, she seems genuinely sorry. And he's all, you have the brains of a chicken. What is it? No, he starts by saying, you women should stay home where you belong. It's like, okay, there's a pretty clear through line going on here in this movie. And it's like, yeah, she made a mistake, but like, just deal with it, buddy. Like, just settle down. So he says she has the brains of a chicken, and she's all, you're an asshole. So fair enough. But she moves on, but she gets a little word, and so in fact, I think he says, I've got a note here, I think he says that women are a menace to the public. So he's obviously overreacted here. So when on the boat, she gets off her bike naturally and wanders around the boat. She gets into a car, and with lipstick, so I guess that's sort of symbolic, right? It's a woman sort of using a very womanly object to vandalize the guy's car. I don't know where the guy is, but he puts lipstick onto the wind. She writes the word shit. Maybe she was going to write shithead. I don't know, but she just writes shit. And then we see the perspective of the killer. And there are a couple of... Look, it's not that it's uncommon necessarily for slasher films, but there's something particularly effective, I think, in the way that they... in the POV shots that we get from the killer, because it really effectively
displays
the fact that it's anti-woman specifically. So even going back to Halloween, like you can clearly draw a through line in that it's either when having sex or being naked or having recently been naked that the women are killed. But the camera never really, it doesn't linger in that way, whereas it quite consciously, deliberately lingers in this film. And you know, she is having a bit of a conversation with the duck, and you know, she seems to be getting along with him, but then suddenly he's all stop it, and she gets uncomfortable, and then he stares at her legs that are quite exposed, and she's already wearing short shorts, and they're sort of ridden up a little bit because she's in the car, and you know, I think it's quite immediately after that he starts stabbing her, and he makes a duck noises, and I know that plenty of people don't take this movie in general seriously, or certainly the duck noise element of it. But to be honest, I actually think it's quite effective. Like it's certainly that it's quite excessive, but it really is the point. Now, there's something very, very, very well thought out about the way they put this scene together. So I can't remember if she's been stabbed yet or but it is definitely in the early stages. So we see what I just explained, and then we see a shot that's from outside the car, and her trying to escape. And I think the car's too close to the wall, so there's not really anywhere for her to escape. And then I think it shows her getting dragged back into the car, and there's sort of a sense that like we're being given a slasher trope here, right? We've seen the point, we know what's happening, and it's just shot in a way, and it's shot like the scenes are of a particular length. We're like, okay, that's the end of the scene. We know what happens. But then it cuts back to him actually stabbing her and stuff. And it's very, very disconcerting because it like lures us in to the idea that we're dealing with a normal slasher film here, where the thing that's happening is horrible, but it's going to display some amount of the horror, but then a lot of it's going to be in our mind. But then it's not in our mind. They then show it to us. And I think there's a certain brilliance to this technique, because it's not just that it's more extreme, it's that it lures us into it not being more extreme. Because to this point in the movie, it hasn't really been that. It's been quite traditional slasher, albeit with the context of the men being jerks to women. And then this guy's a jerk to her as well. And then it's like, this is almost a payoff for these early couple of scenes. We're like, no, this isn't just a slasher film where women get killed. They get, and there's a hatred there. And it's, in a way, it's an upgrade. Upgrade's a wrong word, but it's an upping of the ante from the women who have sex in slasher films get killed cliche. It's women get killed for being women in this film. Like the fact that they show her legs in the way that they do, it's like she isn't sexualizing herself; she's just existing, and so she's not an active participant, if you like, in her own sexualization. But he hates her anyway. And that's the thing. There's a very explicit sense of hatred that this person holds towards women. Yeah, so it's quite extensive. I think this is one of those scenes where some of the images are cut out. I think there's some pretty extensive shots of like her midriff and sort of breast area being stabbed. And obviously she dies. And a bit of a final sort of insult is that people behind the car at the end are very impatient, and someone's like a truck behind is like crashing into the car, trying to get it to move. All right. Then we get another scene at the cop shop, and now Lieutenant Williams is talking to Lucio Fulci, who is I believe, described by Lieutenant Williams as the big boss man himself. Wow. Well, if it isn't the big boss man himself. Now, this is one of Fulci's classic cameos, and there's nothing quite like a classic Fulci cameo because they're not really cameos. He would play a character for a whole scene. And as per usual, you can see that he's not really an actor. And there's something about the way he plays this scene that it's not just that he's trying to be an actor, it's that there's almost a wink, wink, I am Lucio Fulci going on here. It's almost to the point that if you didn't know who Lucio Fulci was, you would go, oh, I bet that's the director. So it's, it's pretty funny. But, I think his character serves some purpose. But it's one of the weaker elements of the film. It's almost like Fulci sort of going in and I'm putting my moralistic stance on this movie. And so he's the big boss man himself, and he's going on to Lieutenant Williams about, information regarding the crimes and stuff. And he's going on about what's important. The important impression to give to the public is that the NYPD has this situation under control, with Lucio Fulci's apparently a strong New York accent. Now, I mean, yeah, I get it, right? The purpose is to not create a panic and blah, blah, blah. I just think that that's all a little bit redundant within this film. Like, is that some kind of dig at the concept of PR? Probably. Is it a dig specifically at New York police? Maybe. I don't know. But it's all a bit. I think. I guess what I'm saying is, I think this film actually does. It does have something to say. And I think this scene, to some extent, actually undermines Lieutenant Williams because he's some mixture of sarcastic, disinterested, but also slightly under the thumb of Fulci. And the problem with that is it's outside of his character. It doesn't seem consistent with his character. Because the whole scene, it feels like he wants to be a massive jerk to him, but can't. But then you look at just the size difference and the knowledge. Put it this way, Fulci doesn't have the on-screen presence to give the impression that Jack Headley's character would be in any way under his thumb or fearful of him or apprehensive around him. So anyway, that's enough of criticising Fulci's acting because, I'll probably be doing that in a couple of months' time with some of the other films. So we get the moment where the cop guy's like, somebody's called Santa just like a duck. Like a duck? Where? Never heard that before. So we enter sort of, I would sort of say the second phase of the film. He now has to go to talk apparently to Dr. Paul Davis or Paolo Malco, played by Paolo Malco, about how to run this, how to track this killer down. Now, it took me a number of watches of this film, and let me assure I've watched this film many times, a number of watches of this film to eventually go, you know what? I actually think that Dr. Davis is a very, very well thought out character. So initially, I felt that it was very, not condescending exactly, but maybe just poorly thought out, that the way that we put Lieutenant Williams there, who, he's not an idiot. He seems like an okay but exhausted cop. But his problems are more that he's not really that focused. He doesn't seem all that focused on things, and he's just a bit of a jerk. So he's a bit of a jerk straight away to Dr. Davis. Well, the problem is that I want to talk to Dr. Davis. Well, that one you've solved. So I guess on the first few watches, I thought, if you're trying to create a genius, he seems smart in some ways, but also a bit not that smart. Like there's that moment where he's all, well, I've made three conclusions. He is likes. I can't remember what the conclusions are, but one of them is that he likes attention, and another one's that he likes to provoke you. It's like, well, that's great. This is great. But eventually, I think I realized that he's deliberately not what the claim of him is meant to be. I think it's really meant to depict the idea that obviously the men have all the solutions here, but they don't. And I'm sure when the time comes and I get to the final scene, I'll explain completely. But as a bit of a preview, it's very condescending the way he explains both to Faye Majors and to the audience all the stuff that just happened. In a sense that I thought it was poorly written, and then I eventually realized it was deliberately written that way. But anyway, we'll get to that as we go along. So, where one of the challenges of watching this movie, aside from all of the grotesquerie and the discomfort, is that it takes you, or it takes me anyway, until, well, probably actually consuming the whole movie and going, what is it? What is it that's off about this film, apart from the obvious? And it's that all of the main characters are jerks, but they're not hateful. They're not like Jurassic Park 3, where they're just nothing. Like the characters are just annoying. It's that they are. So Lieutenant Williams and Dr. Davis, they are in service of good. They are. But the only characters that we like, apart from Faye, get brutally butchered. And in many cases, they aren't really characters. They're there for a scene or a couple of scenes. Maybe we like them because they're attractive models, and because they seem quite pleasant. But there's just something off about that dynamic where, there's a lot of scenes with characters that don't even really seem like characters, and it's partly because the introduction to Faye and Peter is so bizarre that it takes a few scenes to, are these guys, who are these guys? These guys are in the movie now, I guess. But we'll come to that momentarily. And so we get a fairly abrupt introduction to Mika Scalenda, and he's, very well cast, this bloke. You look at his face and you go, yep, that's probably a sex pest. He just looks like the kind of guy who would have been wandering around New York in the early 1980s, that if you saw him, you're like, I'm probably avoiding this guy. So this is when we enter absolute grindhouse territory. That idea that, like, films that would be shown in grindhouses, they didn't have to necessarily be great films. They didn't even necessarily have to make that much sense, but we need a certain quota of violence and sex. And the interesting thing about this, he's walking around on some street, and a guy gives him a pamphlet. It's like, oh, sexual, beautiful girls, and he goes in, and there's just some people having sex, and suddenly you go, I'm not watching a slasher film anymore. I'm watching 1980s softcore porn. And it's bizarre because that kind of thing, despite horror movies being a good excuse in the day to show some nudity, show some boobs, it was still horror movie nudity. It wasn't porn. We're going back to the days of magazines and well before internet porn. So this is where you get it. It's like this is pretty intense for a slasher movie. So it's not just the fact that they show it. It's that you know, it shows Mikas looking over towards Jane is Alexandra Delicolli's uh, name. So Jane, and she's there to watch. He's there to watch. They're in the same room, and she's recording it and masturbating, and he's getting a real curious kick out of this. And it's like, what is this? What is this movie all of a sudden? What's going on? So it's quite disconcerting because you just don't see this in these types of movies, even as they evolved and became more and more extreme. It is this is actually pornographic for what we're dealing with, and good luck to it. It's quite fascinating, to be honest. Um, so at the end of the scene, and I think this is crucial. She's played by Zora Kerova, is the sex lady who was in Cannibal Ferox, and she's quite naked in that film as well. As she's walking back to her room, one of her colleagues, I guess, is like, "How was?" And she's like, "Yeah." So, again, I think it's trying to make us uncomfortable with. I mean, we're probably already uncomfortable because this is pretty seedy, this situation. And let's just say Mikas and Jane are not a traditional match. So that whole situation looks off. But that casualness to it, because it is, even though they're having sex, that it's sort of, well, sensual in a sense. Anyway, so she goes back to the her room or whatever, and she wanders around, and the music gets very curious and dark because there's a light bulb off. And somewhere within this scene, we cut back to another sex scene that's now being performed, and that is quite sensual. It's even got little sensual music that goes with it. And one thing that is very much worth noting, again, how the film makes us uncomfortable, in that little cutscene, and also the one where Zora Kerova is having sex, there's something very clean and smooth about the skin of all the people that we see. And I think it's quite genius sort of cinematography in a way, because when Eva, or Zora Kerova's character, steps on the glass from the broken light bulb, you feel it. You really feel it, because we're thinking smoothness, we're thinking sensuality. Not that it would be comfortable anyway, but just so much glass in her foot and there's blood everywhere. And then she gets stabbed in the crotch, and she gets very stabbed in the crotch. The killer is hiding in her wardrobe or something, and while he's doing it, he's quacking away. He's really, really quacking. Now, I'm sure women who've watched this are even more uncomfortable, but it's not a very comfortable thing to watch. And to put it mildly, it's a very sexualized murder. It's very, if you wanted to depict someone who hates women and kills women because he hates them, this is how you would do it, especially right after she's just had sex. So she's dead. And she's very dead. Like the way she falls back with her arms behind her head. It's as far as death acting goes, it's pretty good. And then we get this sort of weird, quite effective shot. It sort of lingers on her for a few seconds. And there's this sort of reddish tinge that goes across the screen. Anyway, look out for that next time you watch it. Yes, so we've just seen some kind of sex work in action, if that's what you want to call it. And then, as if to not as if we aren't uncomfortable enough, we then see Lieutenant Williams in bed with Daniela Doria, who also appears in, I believe, City of the Living Dead. And I think everyone who looks at Daniela Doria likes her. We'll just leave it again. And that, again, we might say not a traditional match. I think it's well into the scene that it's established definitively that this is a sex worker. This isn't just a natural relationship. I think we gathered that anyway. But again, it just adds to the seediness of everything, because Lieutenant Williams is, he's meant to be the hero of the film in a sense. And whilst someone might go, oh, well, look, he's really punching or whatever, it's just in the context of him investigating a guy who's butchering young, attractive women, it just seems the poor taste that he pays to have sex with one of them. Anyway, she gets a phone call, and she's, oh, it's for you. It's like, for me? And, it turns out to be the Doc, the murderer, is all, it happened again. It happened again. So he's doing that for a while. But you could never understand. You're too stupid. And she's all, what a voice, blah, blah. And they sort of have a bit of a conversation. I think he tells her to get him something, and she's like, I'm a prostitute, not your wife. Which I think is the revelation moment. And for some reason he calls her a dumb bitch. I can't remember why, but it's not good. So I guess we could say at this point that things are heating up, perhaps. Like, we don't like anyone. Women are being murdered. The hero's a jerk. Just everything is very off. So we then cut to, I think we cut to, but soon after this anyway. It's Jane, Alexandra Delacolle, with that actor who is a fucking great horror person. Is his name up here? Cosimo Cinieri. I think he was in Manhattan Baby as well. But he's just got a great horror movie face, and also dodgy sex pest type face. He's sitting there, and I think he's listening on a little old tape recorder to the recording of that she took at the New York show, at the sex show. And he's listening, and then it's established in this scene that, like, this is the dynamic that they have. So I'm not clear exactly in my mind what the purpose of this is, right? Other than, it's obviously to show sort of, let's say, sex in a non-traditional way. But I don't know that it's necessarily critiquing or being critical of that. But also, just in the context of this film where there's all these dodgy people around, and he's just a dodgy guy, and I think he says something about needing some alone time, and then he opens up a drawer and there's all these tapes in there. But she's also like, oh, yes, I'm going out tonight. She's, don't have too much fun. So whatever it is, it's like, it's just really seedy. And, like, everything in this film is very, very seedy. So then we get the likes to be noticed, and yes, and a quote. This is just because I've taken the notes in order, so I think it's good to follow along in order to stay on track with everything. But Dr. Davis says to Lieutenant Williams,
you can be quite sure that we're up against a very superior mind. And I mean, that's probably quite a giveaway as it goes along that it's going to be Peter because he's doing some study of entropy at absolute zero, some bullshit. But like, um, again, it's sort of inherent in the attitude of the men in this film that men do have superior minds. So I don't think it's necessarily so much a clue, even though it is about who the killer is. I think the more important element of it is to reinforce it. So anyway, we get to that awful scene in the pub, and don't get me wrong, it's a good scene, but you know, I guess one of the main point of this is women have been in this film, let's say, put in their place. And again, don't at me. I'm not saying that they need to be put in their place. I just meant within the context of the awful men that are in it, okay? In their minds, let's say, women are being put in their place. But they may be going out of their place from time to time, right? Like they can't have control over their own sexual freedom or whatever. It's a sort of battle against progressive sexual values and blah, 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 blah. So someone who's sort of out of place in that is Jane, right? She goes to these sex shows. Her husband lets her. She is a very sexual being, clearly. And she's this very well-to-do, very well-dressed, very attractive, very model-like person who's driving a very expensive car. And she just goes to one of the dodgiest-looking parts of New York. And I believe that this actually it was simply shot in a really dodgy part of New York. And they just did it. I don't think they had permission to, and I think a lot of the crew worry about their stuff getting stolen. So it's a fascinating thing. So they go into this bar. Sorry, she goes into this bar, and there's all these like youngish, maybe sort of late 20s, early 30s looking men who are just disgusting. Just everything they're doing is disgusting. So she sits down, and two of them approach her, and what's so bizarre about this scene is that it gives the impression that this is something these two blokes do. So there's two of them, and one of them puts his foot under the table, under the skirt of Jane, and does what you would imagine he does, and he's all, when a twat is hot, it's more comfortable. And she tries to get up, and then the other one's like, I'll buy you a beer, and my friend will take you for a ride. And so what the fuck's going on? And this happens for a while, and there's this seedy but really effective tapping music that's going on in the background, and it becomes more intense. Again, it's very pornographic, more and more intense, and she seems to be enjoying this process somewhat. And they want her to acknowledge that that she likes it, and they pressure her. And the guy with the beer, he's all sip, like it's a very bizarre scene. And eventually, the second that she does acknowledge she likes it, then they pull the table away, and everyone in the bar can see it, and she's meant to be embarrassed, and they're high-fiving, and it's like, it honestly gives a distinct impression that this is just something these guys do. And it's like, what the fuck? What is this? Like, again, it's like it builds out the, what this film is trying to depict unbelievably effectively. It's probably the most important scene for the generalized, attitude of men towards women in this film. But goodness me, it's such a bizarre way of depicting it. So she rushes out, and we're all worse for it. So I think to this point, why the film is so good, in my opinion, is that it starts off with the stakes very high. We see the severed hand, and we know that there's a killer on the loose, which is very,
generically horror film-esque or slasher film-esque, but it's still managing to up the ante without having an excessive number of murders, because it ups the ante in attitude. So we get increasingly uncomfortable as it's going along. We're then introduced to Faye. She's in a train, probably the emptiest train ever on the New York subway, but Mikas is there, and she is a bit uncomfortable, it's fair to say. And he's coming closer to her, and he's looking very suggestively at her. And, she rushes off the train. There's a cool little chase scene. And then she ends up in a cinema, and she's watching some kind of little cartoon, I suppose. And I think then she gets slashed, her throat gets slashed, and then we're introduced to Peter. He's the one doing the slashing in the dream. And then she wakes up. Now, I don't think the film makes... Well, actually, no, I take that back. It does. Because she explains it to Peter. That, she was... She specifies that she then had this weird dream or hallucination about being in a cinema and then being killed. And thinking about it now, I think this is part of the genius of this film, is that she's placed in a cinema very specifically. I think it's a sort of an allegorical thing that women feel very put against in films like this, that the cinema for women, that the horror cinema for women is a very hostile place. So I think it's quite symbolic that she's put there. And the other thing is, at the end of that, it's worth mentioning, the killer is introduced. The first time we see him is in a hallucination of a character that we haven't seen yet. So then he comes into the hospital. She explains it all to him. And when she sort of jokingly says, "Oh, and it was you, Peter, you were the killer," he does this little laugh, this uncomfortable laugh thing. And it's like, it's obvious that it's you. It's like just right from that moment. It's very, very obvious that it's him. Especially because, I think we know it'd be too obvious if it was Mikas. Like, obviously the film's trying to show us that it's Mikas. Right. So then soon after, where Mikas and Jane are back together, having a little fling, and Jane is tied up. And what I found interesting about this is I've only ever seen this woman in 2 movies. And in both of them, she is at one point tied up naked in a sort of star formation, which is just... I don't know if I should make a joke of this, but it's quite interesting that, like, it's like, oh, we need a person to be naked and tied up on her back and arms and legs spread out. Like, oh, well, she did this in Zombie Holocaust, so she's probably our girl. Anyway, it's just bizarre. So there's this really, really tense scene where we're listening to this little DJ guy. So why, killer, why? Saying to that man with 2 fingers missing on his left hand, or whatever he says. And while he's saying it and she's listening to the radio, she's noticing the 2 fingers missing on his hands, and and there's a lot of panic. Later, he's asleep. She escapes up to a point, but then someone stabs her to death. And I guess the film is half trying to insinuate that Mika's found her, but I think we know pretty clearly that it's not him. So, and just a memorable quote from the DJ: "Ripper, leave the ladies alone." Very funny.
And he seems to be in some kind of closet. It really doesn't seem like a DJ setup. But anyway, and so um, there's a bit of a section with some investigations going on. I don't think I'll go too much into those. He talks to some woman who explains something about Mikas, and she's all in tears, and she's got all little crack pipes and stuff that are shaped like penises, and it's whatever. Oh, and somewhere in here, the Dr. Davis buys a gay porn magazine at a little stall. Okay, so then we get some sort of moralizing. Look, if there's a flaw with this, well, there's many flaws, but if there's a flaw with the philosophy or attempted philosophy that this film's trying to depict or engage with, I don't think it's the philosophy itself. I think it's the way they introduce it very late. That is, so it almost feels like two ideas were brought together, and that the Peter and Jane stuff should have been more central from the start. So there's that. So Jane's really she's been through an ordeal, right? She's been followed. She's exhausted, and there's that scene where the outside's in New York and the inside's clearly in Rome or something. That they're having this conversation, and Jane's just trying to say that she just needs some rest, and then Peter goes on this long speech about, in this country, if you're not the best at something, then you're nothing, or whatever he says. I can't remember exactly what he says. Also, it's worth mentioning before I forget, this is just after a scene where Dr. Davis is talking to them, and he sort of is explaining. In fact, no, sorry, I've messed that up. I think he says this to Lieutenant Williams, saying something about women having a defect. I think he says, say, a woman with a defect, so she's frigid. It's interesting. It's interesting. Like, even the genius has this sort of underlying hateful attitude towards them. Anyway, so right, there's a couple of things in that conversation. He says that she lacks willpower. There's the quote: If you're not the best, you're screwed. You won't get anywhere. Now, and he says that he wants her to go for gold in the Olympics, and she wants to recover. She just needs a bit of love and care, and he's not having it, right? And then it de-escalates. Well, not that it's escalated, but it de-escalates. And he says she's such a dummy, but it's a nice thing, but it's still like they haven't come to an agreement. Now, this is an interesting concept that this idea is explored. It's just that it's explored too late, because by the time we get to the revelation about his daughter, it sort of makes you go, well, they hadn't really earned this back stuff, because I think we only sort of learn about it like after an hour there's been an hour of the movie. So anyway, then she walks up to a very well kept little girl's room. She reads something about a hospital, and then Mikas comes in, and there's a little incident. And then, that's when they have the conversation. Okay. Anyway, so that film, that section of the film, it's not amazing. It's not terrible. It just it gives us some necessary exposition that it probably should have given us earlier, I think, is the best way to put it. Then I think the back end of the film from this moment is just fantastic. It's just great. Not always in the best way, but it is. So They get a call at the cop station. And he's quacking away. He's all, I want to dedicate a killing to you, a special offering. And they track the location. I'm sure at the time this was a pretty cool reveal, but to be honest, it's still a pretty cool reveal for mine. They track the location to a little phone booth in New York, and they go in, and it's a walkie-talkie. And it's so brilliant because for the length of the film, as much as like he's been one or two steps ahead of them in that they haven't caught him yet, there's a bit of a sense that he's an idiot, the killer. But in this scene, you're like, actually, I can work with this. Like this is very smart because he's playing with them just to upset Lieutenant Williams. He set this scenario up. Like he could have just killed the girl, but he sets this up to play with her, to play with him, and it's also a very childish thing, right? There's obviously he's sort of depicted as childlike, like he isn't mentally developed with the dark thing, and the fact that he uses a walkie-talkie, you know, I know, look, probably at the time they were quite nifty devices, but there's something very like I'm playing a game here, lol, about it. So, I think it's quite well acted when they open up and he sees it, and it's like immediately just knows. So I didn't make clear the killing that he's going to dedicate to him is Daniele Doria, his prostitute friend, and it's like he got him. You know, he didn't just kill her, but he messed with Lieutenant Williams, and he messed with him very, very effectively. And the look on his face, like he knows that she's going to die. And so, nonetheless, he looks there for a bit and then they rush off. And it's sort of interspersed between shots of them rushing because he knows where she is. And it's worth noting as well, he doesn't immediately say her location, probably because it's like, I shouldn't really know where she is because blah, blah, blah. But then he does. And while they're rushing there, it's cutting between him rushing there and the stabbing scene. Now, I've got 2 or 3 versions of New York Ripper, and I think this is where, I think a multitude of little cuts are made. Pardon the pun. Removed images because it's just too violent. Now, it's pretty violent, this scene, and I think it's pertinent that it's the last killing that we see, because it's like it's the ultimate crescendo. And, you know, there's a sense that like he wants to dedicate this killing to Lieutenant Williams as a bit of a punishment. It's not just a game, but there's a punishment going on. Like you're sleeping with this beautiful woman, and that is part of his explanation at the end. So the punishment is extreme. There's that stab, there's that slicing the eyeball in half bit, and that bit where he cuts the nipple in half. Oh, goodness me. It's hard to watch. And it's just a brutal, brutal, brutal scene. But I guess this is sort of the point again. Yeah, okay, it's gratuitous, blah, blah, blah. I do think it earns the right. Or should I say, the excess of this killing is maybe justified isn't the right word, but I'll use it. Is justified in the context of what is the film trying to do? What is it trying to depict? And the extent of this killing requires it to be like this. And in that sense, it works. So then we see that she's dead when Lieutenant Williams gets there too late. So it's then established that Mika's just been dead for, 8 days. And there's that annoying scene. And there's a final sort of scene where Dr. Davis is all, maybe the killer pig victims were better off than them. A woman chooses those pretty something wrong. That's the something wrong with them bit. All right. Anyway, sorry, I didn't explain that very. Something wrong with them, such as being frigid. Okay. Then it shows. We have. I think it's one of the more tender, but it's a difficult scene where we are suddenly introduced to the dying daughter. She's got some kind of disease, and Faye is there. So she's watching her have a story about piggies read. There's all kinds of animals. There's ducks, and in a sense, it's a story of. It's a story. It's sort of the story that we're actually watching. It's actually the movie that we're watching. It reduces what we're watching to a children's tale. So this is the actual story that's being read to the little girl. There was a tiny pig, a baby pig just born, and when they saw it, they all jumped up and down with glee. Oh, they were excited. I never knew piggies could be so cute and funny. I wish we could take him home. Granny said, "Quack, quack. You like him? You can have him if you want, but you'll have to ask your uncle's permission." Lickety split, they called their uncle, who said in a deep voice, "Humph! But I thought you said you had a puppy when you were little. Can we have one too?" And the uncle went, "Quack, quack. Okay, but it better not, but it better not be very big or eat too much." So they picked up the piggy and took it home. And when the uncle saw it, he was mad. "I think that was a nasty trick. You didn't tell me you were talking about a baby pig. Quack, quack. Quack, quack, take him back. Oh, please, uncle, he's so tiny." "Well, okay, quack, quack." And while this is happening, the daughter basically looks dead. Now, the reason I read that out, and the reason I say this is like what we're watching, is it's nonsensical. It's a silly little thing that, to be honest, it's hard to see how that would even appeal to children. It's funny and cute, I suppose, but and so what the hell is that story? What the hell is going on? So it's childish, it's convoluted, it's all over the place. It's the killer's mind when he's killing, I think. Like, he's quacking away when he's killing. His thoughts are, he thinks that they're clear, but they're actually all over the place. But I think my point when I say it's the story of the movie is that the childish confusion of it and the vagueness, the all over the placeness of it explains his way of thinking regarding men. Regarding women, regarding fully grown women. Like, it's undeveloped. He doesn't really understand. This really is a fairly common trope throughout giallo films, and I haven't actually made this point, but just so we're right, I do these podcasts in series of 3. This is my random giallo series. The previous one was Spasmo. This one being New York Ripper, and the next one will be Opera, the Argento one. So join me for that next month. Anyway, I just thought I'd get that shout out. But it's convoluted and it's all over the place. So we then get the final scene. The final scenes. I think just after the story, we see Dr. Davis and the lieutenant are there, and Dr. Davis is all, "She'll never grow up to be a woman. Now I understand." And in a way, I guess it's sort of the final insult to women in the film, is that they actually get the blame. If I could pull it that far. So Faye, well, there's a fairly confusing scene, and I think the film takes advantage of the dubbing situation too. There's a phone call, and we hear the duck voice, but the first half second of the scene, we hear the duck voice, but Peter is on screen and he doesn't speak. Like, his mouth isn't moving. So the film's quite dodgy because it actually implies that it isn't him. Anyway, there's that happens. She pushes him down the stairs, and he's lying there with his eyes open and not moving. But then he gets up, and he's all, "You're just like the rest of them. You're beautiful, smart, and blah blah blah." And then he's going on about how his daughter has to lie there in a dirty, stinking hospital, blah blah. And it's like, it's a fairly reasonable explanation, because it's like you can see. This sounds terrible. You can see where he's coming from, right? Um, he's all over the place, and it's ridiculous and entirely unjustified. But you can see the logic of it. And they've had these other moments where he's been quite a jerk to her. And she and I think one of the nurses tells Faye at a point that, in fact, no, I think the nurses they tell the dynamic duo, Dr. Davis and Lieutenant Williams, that the little girl's dad never comes to see her. So it's like, I actually think the ending of the film is very, very effective. So here we are. We're at the ending of the film. Right. So they're there. Well, Lieutenant Williams shoots Peter Bunch in the face. It's pretty effective. I mean, it's pretty obviously a prosthetic head, but it's a pretty good shot, right? Pun the pun. And they're just there. And the last scene is so good because, look, I understand you have a film, you do a little writing, and like the end of Psycho, you want to be like, yeah, look at how clever we are. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying this film isn't doing that. However, if you can do that whilst also adding to the point of your film, then good luck to you. So Dr. Davis is given the honor of explaining to us what's happened. And he's sitting next to, I think he's got his arm around Faye, right? He's explaining very clearly the situation to what was wrong with Peter, and then he's all, and all the little girl wanted was a little affection. And there's so much irony going on here, because it's like, yes, Dr. Davis, and you need to understand right now that after what Faye's just been through, she doesn't need it explained back to her directly. You're actually being a fucking jerk. And he is a jerk. All the men are jerks in this film. And so the moral core of this film is through Faye, right? That's the thing. This is why I get so annoyed. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that, if you want to see feminism in action, you should sit down and watch The New York Ripper. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is I get so annoyed at the way people just dismiss films like this because they don't understand them. So that sounds very righteous. But, I've done over an hour of discussing it and why I think this. There is actually a message in this film. And it is that with all of this misogyny going on, and obviously we see the horrific results of it. We see the murder, the neglect, and the murder. Lots and lots of murder. But it's not just saying that men are bad. It's saying that natural feminine qualities are very, very good. I think we inherently understand when Faye and Peter have that conversation that Faye's right. She says, I just need a little love and affection. And he's not about that. He doesn't care. He doesn't understand, right? But and also, despite the fact that the little girl, I don't believe, is hers, it's not hers. She has the care to go to the hospital and go see her. And she's very sad. I think she's crying in one of the scenes, right? There's empathy, there's love, there's care, there's female feminine qualities, right? And Peter Bunch hates those. But I guess the point there is, obviously Peter's the villain of the film. But as I said earlier, the film, it isn't about saying all men are bad. But the villain, the metaphorical, the philosophical villain of this film is masculinity that that doesn't understand the worth of femininity, I think is what I'm trying to say. Because so Peter's like that, but then there's the jerk with the comment about the brains. You have the brains of a chicken. There's the jerks, the awful people in that pub playing pool. And then there's Lieutenant Williams, who calls Miss Doria a dumb bitch. But then there's Dr. Davis, who he's all theory, but he doesn't understand what the hell he's talking about. Like he's saying, well, all she wanted was little love and affection. It's like, you've shown none of that. You're disrespectful to women yourself. You know, he talks about women with defects and something wrong with them, that frigidity is something wrong with a woman, right? So that last or second last scene is explained by him. It's almost like the film's going, hey, we don't even know, we don't even understand how bad this neglect of women's feelings is. And then the ultimate ending is the little girl on the phone going, Dad, I don't know why she's British, but Daddy, please answer, Daddy. And again, I've watched this film many times, and I always felt, I usually, or for a while, felt that the film hadn't earned this scene. But I eventually realized, like, no, it absolutely has. And possibly, again, I said with the writing thing before, but I might have talked myself out of it. Possibly it is effective that we don't know about the little girl until later, and we don't really know that much about Peter and Jane until later, because it is building up. It is building into this misogyny. It doesn't show us the effects necessarily immediately that it has on the world, but we see them now. So after all this, we see the ultimate neglect of this little girl. Again, all she wants is a little bit of care, love, and affection. He didn't show it. She doesn't know that Daddy is dead, but the part of this scene that I didn't appreciate until recently is then we get the New York cop music that's happening, that sort of drowns her out. And then I realize, that's the point, right? Even after all this. And the film makes us care, I think, even though we don't deal with the little girl that much, but, you know, she's deathly, I think one of her arms is missing. Like, you know, it's pretty easy to make us feel sorry for her, right? And then it just drowns her out. And it always felt like lazy editing or thought to me. And then I thought, no. Again, it's in keeping with the philosophy of the film, right? The film itself is ignoring her, right? The ultimate insult. It drowns it out. The sirens. New York is too big. There's too many bastards. There's too much murder. No one cares about women. No one cares about little girls, at least within the context of this film. I think it's fantastic. I think I hope that I've done a good job justifying it. But either way, I hope you've enjoyed this discussion. I've really gone on. I didn't expect to go on for so long. Join me next month for discussion of the 1987 Dario Argento film Opera. This has been my discussion of the New York Ripper from 1982. I'm the Italian Horror Guy.